going to start recording. All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Justin, or JPB Gerald. I am the VP of Advocacy for New York State TESOL. This is the beginning of a three-part series from the Advocacy Committee on different types of advocacy. In a moment, Christine will explain what some of the different types of advocacy are because they're in the presentation, but I just wanted to introduce today's presentation and make sure you're all in the right place because there's a bunch of presentations going on right now. And also to welcome you because we are glad to have you here. As Susan just said in the chat, we know you're all busy. You probably spend all day in some version of the classroom, whether you're in person or on the computer. And we're glad that you chose to spend this hour with us. So today, leading the presentation, there's two people, but the primary person leading the presentation is Christine Passarelli. Christine has been teaching for 17 years in New York City. She has a bachelor's in elementary education and a master's in TESOL education, both from Hunter College, CUNY, where I am currently a doctoral student, so we must big that up. And she has been an ENL teacher and a coordinator at PS22 in Staten Island, New York since 2007. She joined the advocacy team in 2020. So without further ado, Christine, please take it over. And Susan, if you want to fire up those slides in a second.
Okay, thank you, Justin, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Passarelli. I'm very excited to be sharing this hour with you today. This is something that I feel very passionate about. Everyone on the advocacy team is obviously very passionate about, is lifting the voices of our ELLs and how to be an advocate within our schools. So on the next slide, you're going to just see the members of our NICE TESOL committee. So this year we have 6 members. There's Justin, he's our VP. We have Susan LaFond. We have Lisa Frischia, Jasmine Bird, Dorothy Caldone, and we also have myself. And we're always looking for new members. So if anyone is interested in joining us in our advocacy, you can email vpadvocacy@nicetesol.org, and we'll send you some information to let you know how you can get more involved in our organization. On the next slide, we're just going to go over a few basic terms, things that you're going to be hearing as we go throughout this presentation. So the first thing is, what is advocacy? So advocacy comes in many forms, on many different levels, but the umbrella term is used for different types of policy and political engagement that can occur at any individual, communal, or system-wide level. So when you're doing advocacy for learners or for anything that you really want to get others to jump on board and believe in with you, then you can do it either through conference presentations like today. You can write papers, which is something that the TESOL advocacy team usually does, presenting webinars, submitting surveys, and also going to the policy summits. On the next slide, you'll be seeing that there are many opportunities in education and in all areas for you to be able to advocate for your students and to advocate for teachers and educators. So there are many different, in this chart, you see decision-making tables that we can leverage and go to have support when we're trying to advocate for our students. There's going to be 3 sessions coming up. This is the first session. Our next session is going to be focusing on the next level up, and then one more after that. So this session today is focusing here where you see the yellow, which is our local school community of advocacy. Then next, we're going to be looking more at like a district-wide level. And in our later session in April, we will be looking more about like the statewide and, nationwide, national level of advocacy. So do look out for those sessions. They will be coming up in March and in April, around the same dates, I think like March 22nd or 23rd, Justin said, and then the 3rd session will be April 21st. On the next slide, I'm just going to start opening up how we're going to be talking about our advocacy. So type in the chat, yes or no, if this sounds familiar to you, if this is something that you hear when you're working in your school with your students. You walk into a classroom where you're integrating for ELA or math or any subject, and you hear the teacher saying, they can't do anything. Well, what can I do for them? They don't speak English, right? How can I help them? How much longer before they speak English? Or they think that the family doesn't care. They never come to any of the events. They don't show up for conferences. The family can't do anything to help them because they don't know English. Sound familiar? It's something that we hear quite often. Hopefully, we're starting to hear it less and less. I know that it is something in my building that um, we do sometimes still hear, but we have many ways to help to make it become less of the norm. So that's what the point of today's session is going to be. How do we get our teachers and all the stakeholders in our school building, right, and in our smaller communities to really get on board to advocate and understand the needs of our learners and to see how they can help them to reach their fullest potential. So on the next slide, what I suggest is starting within your classrooms, right? Find those like-minded teachers, people who share the same philosophies on educating language learners and all students of all abilities that you have. As a veteran teacher, yeah, I guess I can say I'm a veteran teacher now, right? But when I was first starting, I didn't have that choice to really pick who I was co-teaching with or where the students were placed. Um, and it took some time, but when I started working with more teachers across my school building, I would get to, engage in conversations and find out who are the teachers that really do believe in our learners? Who are the teachers that um, are willing to go the extra mile to dig deeper, to find ways to reach everyone, and who believe in their fullest potential? So my advice is that when you're starting out in the beginning, find those teachers, try to collaborate with them. And if you don't have them, what I suggest also is be a believer in yourself and being able to go to your classroom teachers and share your knowledge with them, right? Make sure that you're bringing all of your scaffolds and strategies that you know are going to be effective, and bring that with a passion to those teachers. And when you exude that into the classrooms, you will get people to jump on board and be right there with you and feel the same way. Also asking to attend the same trainings as those mainstream classroom teachers. In the past, it was always that, ENL teachers went to ENL training and classroom teachers went to, their own content area trainings, and it was always separated. And now that we're, looking at CR Part 154 and we're doing more of an integrated approach, it's really important, if we're going to be working together as a team, that we are invited and we ask to be invited to those same trainings as the classroom teachers, and then advocating for them to come to trainings with us that specialize in ELL, MLL students. On the next slide, we're going to be sharing with you other things that you can do. So like I was saying earlier, sharing your knowledge with others. Tap into that knowledge base that we know that you have as a specialist, and you can bring in those effective strategies and the cultural awareness to your classrooms, right? When you go into the classrooms, don't be afraid to share something if you see that the teacher maybe is struggling a little bit with reaching a student and something that would work. Bring it out there and say, hey, in a positive tone, let me try this, or how about we try, to do it this way, or bring in that bag of tricks with visuals and hands-on materials for our learners. Another great thing that I've always done and is really helpful is if you're providing classroom teachers with a list of strategies and scaffolds, all kinds of supports that you can use with your learners for when you're not there. Because we know that as ENL teachers, we're spread across several classrooms. If you only have one classroom to co-teach in, you're very lucky. But if you don't, and you're like me and you have about 5 or 6 classrooms and teachers to work with, you want them to have something to go to if you're not there, because you're only there for a certain amount of time throughout the school week. So we should be dropping in the chat. We have a link here for the go-to strategies from CALA. It's really a great document. I've gone through it and used it before. So when you have a chance, go through it, and then you can pull some of those strategies that you think are the most effective, make a quick little, template, and then share it off with your coworkers and say, hey, I have this here. It's just a little tip sheet, and maybe they'll want to tack it up in their classroom. On the next slide is really going back into your classroom. So really, when you're collaborating, you want to make sure that you're collaborating with others, not just classroom teachers, but one of the primary things for advocating for ELLs is rotating as the lead teacher in lessons. This is one of the greatest ways that we can earn our place in the classroom and have others start to have more faith. And if they're seeing that we're able to reach our learners and that we're able to show that, they do want to do the work, they want to be included, and they want to have their chance to shine, then when we take the lead and we say, okay, you know what, let's, co-teach where we're doing side by side, not always, you teach and I observe. So really rotating that lead teacher position will get you more bang for your buck. Emphasizing the importance of the blueprint for ELLs. It's a huge document, but it's really, really important. There's lots of important information in that document. So maybe pulling that up and sharing it with other people in your building. That's another helpful thing. If you have not found the link for the blueprint for ELLs, we'll also drop that in the chat. The other thing also is that ENL and bilingual teachers should be included in decision-making teams. So I know that one of the big teams that is going on in a lot of the school buildings today is an instructional leadership team. So, they have to have minimally, the principal and administrator, classroom teachers, and oftentimes ENL teachers can get, kind of, again, left off. So be your own advocate, go to the administration and express your interest in being placed as a member on that team, so that this way you can be the voice for the classroom teachers and for the learners for ELLs, and letting them know that you can share and you have valuable things to add to the table. And lastly, the next slide is really getting to get a hold of the stakeholders in your building, right? There's lots of people in a school building. It's not just teachers and administration. There's a lot of people there. We have parent family coordinators, right? We have the secretaries or the ELL intake staff. Like I had said earlier, there's also administration, but take a minute, start to think about who are some of the other people that come into contact with our learners throughout the day. Maybe drop them in the chat. Let's take a minute and think about who are those stakeholders in your building that would have knowledge of our learners and things that they need, right? Because when we think about advocating for our ELLs, it's not only about their education, right? It's not only about what goes on in the classroom, but yeah, it's the school nurse. Thank you, Heidi. The school nurse, she's going to know their health records, right? She'll know if they have a history of something. Classroom, the parents are also really huge stakeholders. We need to get them more involved. They come into contact with guidance counselors, right? Our ELLs are just like, all of our learners, they have other services besides just getting ENL. There could be, like I see Maria typing, IEP teachers, service providers, the parent coordinator. That's a big term in New York City. Every building has one. I'm thinking about the lunch staff, right? They can take note during lunchtime or even breakfast time if learners are going to reach for an extra, tray. Maybe they don't get enough food at home, right? And they're too afraid to speak up that they're struggling to have those kinds of things in the classroom. So they're not going to speak up, but the lunch aides will notice it, and then you can go to them and they can give you more insight on maybe why a child is struggling in the classroom because they're hungry. And then that'll be another door, an avenue to get access to finding out ways that we can help our learners. School safety agents, right? They're the ones who are at the main entrance of the school buildings. They're probably one of the first people to see many of our students throughout the day. And paras are so helpful, right? We have many paras in my building who advocate and get to know their students really, really well because they have to work so closely with them with translation. So yes, all these people, so, so important. Um, so I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to now introduce to you Katie Krjakovic. She is our ELL specialist in the United Federation of Teachers. She is at UFT, is New York City Department of Education, and she's going to be sharing some of her tips and strategies of how she's come in her path with advocating for learners along the way in our school system. So
Great. Thanks, Christine. Thanks so much. So yes, I'm Katie Krjakovic, and just a little bit of my background. I am a 25-year veteran of teaching ENL in Queens, New York. And over that period of time, what I really struggled with, but what I was most excited by, is how to strengthen educator voice, because we know if we advocate for ourselves, we also advocate for our students. So so I know, Christine, I think that, do you want to go to do you have control of the slides?
Yep, next slide.
Okay, great. So so we can go to this. So I just wanted to share some tips and some successes that we've had in New York City in terms of advocacy. And there are, as we all know, there's no shortage of issues to advocate around. And so throughout the city, we've really encountered stories about all different topics. So one of the ones that we've seen is policy and compliance, that we still are needing to advocate around basic rights to services. And so so one thing that we found, that it's very important to ground yourself in the regulations and in the policy, because then it's not as easy for an administration that frankly is not as much of an expert as you are in ELLs and in policy and compliance to to do something that's not the right thing. And so, and it also, by grounding your advocacy in documents, in documentation, it also makes sure that you're not building up a one-to-one power struggle. So, for example, in terms of policy and compliance, one thing that that we heard very recently from a school is this myth that's still out there, that you can't evaluate newcomer English language learners, that you have to, the myth kind of goes something like this: you have to wait 1 to sometimes 3 years or even more before you can evaluate an ELL for special education. And we know that that's not true, but that is repeated by many people. And so the strategy that this particular school, this particular teacher used, was just simply asking to see where that was in writing. And by repeatedly asking that, the administration had to finally admit that it was not in writing. And in fact, it is not true. That policy does not exist, and it's against our ELLs rights. So that was one strategy. And in terms of at the school level, something I think that may sound familiar to all of us is we may have a more advanced or commanding student, and maybe the classroom teacher doesn't want to release that student, or doesn't want you to be coming in to service that student all of the time, and it becomes a territorial issue. If we can just point to the rather than making it a power struggle, and we start to point to the regulation, then that takes really the steam out of their argument, and allows us to do our job and meet the needs of our students. Likewise, when we have discussions with curriculum and pedagogy, I know many of the schools that I have visited, they have issues with some of the curricula that the school has chosen, that they don't necessarily meet the needs of their English language learners. Maybe it doesn't have enough explicit instruction, or it's not as thematically based. And so if you are grounded in research and in best practice, that also is a very powerful way to advocate, because you're not just going from a place of what you think, you're going from a place of what the field recognizes to be best practice. And it's very hard for an administration to counter that. So that we have found to be successful. And in my own building, we were able to keep out a curriculum that we knew would not meet the needs of our ELLs. and to be able to use a different writing curriculum that would be more thematically based and have some more direct instruction, so that staying grounded is very important. And I also wanted to share what we have not had as much success with, but what is ongoing, and that is our advocacy around co-teaching collaborations. We still are finding that a lot of our teachers at the school level have too many collaborators. They don't have time to plan. And so we're trying to address this at a district level. But what we found is that individual advocacy can work quite well. And this is similar to what Christine was talking about with making an ally, make an ally of your collaborator. And so I know that many teachers don't want to give up their power in the classroom because they're worried. They feel, this is for most of the day, this is their classroom, these are their students, and it's uncomfortable for many teachers to give some of that time and some of that authority up. And so ways that I have found that are very helpful are similar to what Christine had mentioned. There was one particular educator in my building who did not want to co-teach. She had gone to the administration and said she did not want to co-teach. Her collaborations had not been successful in the past. And I was assigned to her classroom as a co-teacher. And so I started very slowly, first offering to help her with things that she really didn't have time for, like offering to put up a bulletin board, offering to do a read aloud, little by little, so it wouldn't, she wouldn't feel pressured. And it got to the point where I was able to offer to do a unit. First it was a week unit, and then gradually the trust was built, and she realized that we could work together as a team. So it was starting off rather slowly. So I think we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So we know what we also know is that individual voice can be powerful, but it's not as powerful as when we have collective voice. And we know whatever district we are teaching in, we all have the capability to take part in certain kinds of committees and decision making because we are part of a union. And so we are trying to leverage that as much as possible. And some of the things that, as Christine also had mentioned, we all have school leadership teams. And if we can get an ELL or bilingual educator on the school leadership team, that is a powerful place to be, because you can, if nothing else, you can ask questions. And whenever, when you're talking about grading policy, all it takes is a simple question. Well, what about our English language learners? How can we make sure there's an equitable grading policy? If you're talking about a new curriculum, to raise that question, how is this going to support our English language learners? There's great power in just asking questions by being on these committees. Another committee that you may have at the school level, or if you don't have it at the school level, you do have it at the district level, is professional learning teams. In New York City, we're very lucky to have them at the school level. And so if we have an ELL or bilingual educator on those teams, then we can start to shape the professional learning that is actually given to our students. And the more knowledge that's out there, the less advocacy we're going to have. If, for example, we're seeing some struggles with co-teaching and other content area teachers don't understand what co-teaching actually means and what all of the models of co-teaching are, this is a great opportunity for professional learning teams to make sure that professional learning is built into so that every educator is getting that training. And that, of course, is in the regulations as well, that 15% of our professional learning must be on the education of ELLs. So that is another committee. And then there, your own, think about your school. What committees do you have in your building that allows teacher voice? And how can you use that to be supporting your English language learners? And I just want to leave with a success story about a school committee in one of our schools. And under our contract, under the contract of the United Federation of Teachers, there is every school has a committee. It's a principals consultation committee. And so once a month, the chapter meets with the principal to raise raise issues of concern. And this particular chapter was noticing that the ENL teachers were constantly being, their programs were constantly being canceled so that they could provide coverage. Instead of hiring substitutes, they were asking, the principal was telling ENL teachers to cancel their programs. And this, of course, was that, was having a terribly detrimental effect. The classroom teachers hated it because all of their plans and collaborations, would just fall apart each day. The ENL teachers hated it, and they started seeing that students were not succeeding. And so the ENL teachers and the classroom teachers got together, put together a spreadsheet of how many hours, how many days of services were lost, and then looked at the test scores over the year, and were able to to figure out the consequences, the direct consequences that these program cancellations had, and brought it to the principal's consultation committee, which is, it's a public meeting. There are minutes taken, and because the school got together and was able to bring it to this official school committee, changes were made, and so policies were put in place. And I'm very happy to say that at the school, ENL teachers are no longer asked to cancel their programs because it was brought up at a school committee and handled under the processes that we have collectively bargained. So, it's not easy. Advocacy is not easy, and we don't always win. But if we're at the table, then that means our English language learners are at the table. So thank you so much for listening to our examples, and we're going to try to build on more from here.
Thank you, Katie. We're also, if Katie could drop, we have the slide. If we went a few slides back, if anyone wanted to just jot down Katie's information. If you had any other questions that you wanted to send her way, I've included her email address at the UFT, and also her the phone number that you can reach her. Katie has been a wealth of knowledge for us in New York City. I've attended other presentations with her, and she also runs the UFT L focus group, and we meet once a month or every other month. You attend as many sessions as you like, and it's just a time and a space for us to come and voice our concerns for our English language learners, and be able to piggyback ideas off of one another and find out what's going on in each other's schools, and really just give each other that support so that you're not felt to be so alone. Before we go into Q&A and we go off to the last few slides, I just wanted to share how in the beginning it can be really like a daunting task about the kinds of changes that you want to make in your school building, especially if you feel like you're getting that pushback. Like Katie had said, a lot of the times ENL teachers have way too many co-teachers. You're running ragged, you're being pulled to cover other classes. Find your person who is one step above you, if possible, if there is one, that can also be, you're a champion for you. So the way that we need to be a champion for all teachers, for ourselves and for our students, but we also need someone to help lift us up, and find that person and get them to be in your corner and to help back you up as well. There's definitely strength in numbers. I know that in my school building, like I had said in the beginning, it was kind of all over the place. Students were placed in all different classrooms. It was really hard to manage the number of students, to manage the number of teachers. And yeah, sometimes you're placed with a teacher that you really don't think you're going to work well with. But if you go in there with that positive attitude, if the way that we tell teachers all the time, if you make the students believe in it, and if you show them that you love it, then they're going to love it too. So same thing, it works for everybody. It works for adults too. So if you show adults, listen, we can make this work, right? And you show them your positivity and your enthusiasm, they're going to want to join you. And then they will, trust you, and it will be a much more pleasurable experience in the classroom for everyone. I know that my principal will look at me, or she'll look at our other E&L teacher, and she'll be like, I can see it on your face. You're overwhelmed. Tell me what's going on so that we can, figure this out. And through the years, we've developed a relationship that there's a lot of trust with administration, that we can go to them and say, we need the students placed this way. We need our schedules to be this way, right? We need time to plan for testing. We need people to come on board. L intake, right? That's one of the biggest things. Who's in charge of that? It can't all just fall on one person. So that's another team that you should be putting into place. We did that in my school, and it helps tremendously when it comes time for registration. Someone had even said, like, choosing the right co-teachers. So again, in the beginning, I didn't really have a choice. I was told this is where the E&L students are, and this is where you'll have to work. And then as I became more confident in myself and in my ability to teach and co-teach, I was able to go to my administration and say, in the springtime, in planning for next year, I really like working with this person. It would really be helpful for for the students, and put it that for the students, it's helpful for you, but it's more, it's for the students too, right? I think I can work really well with this teacher. They want to work with me as well. Can we, have the students placed in this classroom? And then they'll see when the students are doing better, the relationships are stronger. They'll want to, put the students in with the classroom teacher so that you can collaborate with those who are more willing to work with you. And then they'll even come to you and say, okay, where do you want, who do you want to be with? And even getting those teachers to come and also express that. There was this misconception when I first started teaching also, that the teacher who had the class with the E&L students needed to be rotated. So I know, like Katie was saying, how like that misconception that you can't do an evaluation on a student who's only been here for, 1 to 3 years. And I've had experience with that, where I've had to make referrals because you can clearly see the child needs more. It's not just about, it's not language. And I had it where I had this experience where they were thinking, what is she talking about? She doesn't know. And I just lost my train of thought. The misconception that the students have to be rotated amongst teachers, because it's not fair for the same teacher to have the E&L students in their classroom all the time, right? And then once they got to realize that the consistency for the teachers makes a greater impact for the students, because when our relationships are stronger, then the students' performance is better. That started to change. And so the rotating back and forth and having to work with a new teacher every year stopped. And it's really, been better when you see that consistency in the relationships. Okay, we do have a slide. I don't know if Susan wants to pull it up, or I'll just tell you about it. We will give you the link to the entire presentation so that you can have access to it and all of the links. Do your research when you're trying to advocate. Also, make sure that you have some tools in your bag to bring to the table when you want to be able to say, hey, I found this research-based article and it's got all these great tips. So I'm not just pulling them out of thin air. So there's 3 websites here that I found. There are links to Coloring Colorado, which is a wonderful website. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, with lots of information on E&L education, bilingual education, communicating with families, making sure that there's access for everyone. The TESOL organization has a lot of information, as does ASCD. So we'll be dropping those links in the chat. And like I said, I think we're going to try to find a way for everyone who's participating today to have a copy of the presentation so that you can have it for your leisure later on. And at this time, I think we are finished. I know I tend to talk a little fast, but we'll open it up now to questions and answers. So if you want to drop a question in the chat, or if you feel comfortable enough to unmute and raise your hand. If you raise your hand, use the raise your hand tool to ask a question. We will call on you in your hands, and then we'll take some time to answer some of your questions. So there's a raise hand feature in Zoom. And if you raise your hand, it'll show us the order in which hands were raised. And then we'll call on you and we'll let you unmute when we call on you.
Someone asked a question already
Yes.
in the chat.
Okay, so I think this might have to go to Katie. So the question is about where there was the teacher shortage and teachers were getting pulled, ENL teachers were being pulled to cover classes and be subs, right? And then you're not giving your mandated minutes. So how is this addressed? So I think Katie has to speak to that specific school, but I know that we've had people from the district level come into the schools in my district and explain that we're mandated service providers and that they would say it was illegal for us to be pulled to cover classes. And then it stopped. Katie, do you have any additional information to share on that? There's a form also that schools can fill out to file a complaint when students aren't getting their mandated services.
Yes, so that's a was a big advocacy that we took part as a union and as a whole district. We came to an agreement with the district that we would have a protocol for when schools were not in compliance. And so the school where the teachers were constantly being pulled, it was raised. First of all, it was raised as a compliance issue. And so once it's oftentimes the administration will do what's easiest for them. And so if there's no pushback, and it's very easy if they can't get a sub to pull an ENL teacher and to cancel their program, then that often can go unaddressed. But it was because the staff in that building gathered together and collectively decided to bring this as an issue and kept a record of how many times the teachers had been pulled. And just by seeing how that added up, day after day, and it led to weeks of lost instruction in some case for students. Once they could present that data, it became virtually impossible for the administration to continue that practice when confronted with the actual data and when it was raised as a compliance issue. So that's where we got success. So it no longer became a burden. So if the principal, and yeah, it was still difficult to hire subs, but the principal had to find a different solution and couldn't solve it by pulling the ENL teachers.
I can't see if anyone has their hand raised.
They do not at the moment.
One of the other things too, like Katie had mentioned, is that the teachers and the staff in that building were making the complaints. So I think that's also very telling in the relationship that the ENL teacher has established with the classroom teachers and the other staff that are stakeholders for our students. So I know that it's a big deal in my building when I'm missing from a classroom. If our other ENL teachers are missing, they seek us out. They're looking forward to us coming in because they know that we have a vital role and to play with our classroom instruction. So definitely looking to build those relationships. It also is just reminding me of the fact that being a teacher, as long as I have, and there are days where I still feel like I'm brand new, right? As a new TESOL teacher, just read my mind. That's exactly where I was going with the suggestions for new TESOL teachers. So when you're new, you need to be linked to a mentor, right? And in some schools, at least in New York City, it's law now that you're provided a mentor your first year of teaching. And so my advice is that for the veteran teachers who have, I think it's 1 year. In New York City, it's one year of logged mentoring. It could be 2, but I think it's for the record keeping, they keep it at 1 year. As a veteran teacher, I'm very open to having newer teachers come, observe me, co-teach with me, come into my classrooms. I take on student teachers when I'm able to. So as a new teacher, I mean, we have a lot of new teachers coming into the field without the classroom experience, which can be very tricky. When I started teaching, I was a classroom teacher. I got my Common Branch license first, and I taught kindergarten. And while I was teaching kindergarten, I worked towards my TESOL certification. As the years have gone on, now teachers are able to become TESOL certified without having that Common Branch license. So my recommendation would really be that when you're placed in a school and you're assigned to your, classrooms that you're going to be co-teaching in, get to know your classroom teachers, try to develop and build those relationships, not just in the classroom. For me, it's always been really important. And I always feel like this is one of the greatest things to do, is to make and establish relationships outside of the classroom. Schools are such busy social places. We develop a lot of relationships, not just, classroom relationships, but personal relationships within a building. And it's once you come into those classrooms with those teachers that you're tagged to, and you observe a little bit and see who your learners are, pick up some tips and tricks that the classroom teachers already have going on, and then run with it. Come in with your own set of tools and say, how about today I teach a small group, right? And start there. Start with a small group. Start small. So when you're a new TESOL teacher and maybe you don't feel so comfortable teaching the whole class, that's okay. But when the classroom teacher sees, like Katie said, that you're willing to do things that she's not always able to do, or he's not always able to do, like, I can go teach a small group. I can do guided reading, right? If you're teaching the younger guys, or I can do a close read of a text. And then they develop that trust in you, and they say, wow, you know what, he or she really wants to be a part of this classroom. And that's your buy-in. Start small and then work your way up as you gain more confidence and you get more of a repertoire of strategies to then teach a full class. That's how I would approach it. That was a great question. Any other questions? Let's see. You're welcome. No hands raised.
Susan, you're muted.
I know what it is. I had my little thing up. I'm trying to unmute and it's not unmuting. So back when I was in a district, in the Capital District area, I could really see the difference between being an ELL educator and being an English, social studies, math, science educator. So a lot of people didn't understand ELL services, compared a lot to special ed. And so teachers would send students to take all their tests with me, just send them down the hall. I mean, they were high school students, but it was a very different situation. And what I found is when it came time to budget for the district in the spring, or actually really they would figure out their budget during the winter into the spring, and then they'd have the budget vote in May. We never really saw a lot added to ours. And so our program wasn't growing. And what we learned to do was to advocate for ourselves in going to the Board of Education, and not in an aggressive way, but more to educate them. So every month I would create a newsletter that I would share with all my colleagues, and I would share with the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, and she would share it with the board. So every month they could see the wonderful things that were going on, new students. They could see some changes. They could see the training that was available that we were doing for educators. They could see articles that we would have. A lot were taken from Colorín Colorado on here's how to work with parents when you don't speak that language. Here's 5 tips for having a culturally responsive classroom. So just a real great go-to newsletter that would have timely topics. So if finals were coming up, hey, here's how you can deal with the final schedule. If they were having finals in January, and some students were taking Regents exams, and each month we would highlight some cultural items to be aware of, some issues that educators may tell me. I would always be online at the copier machine. I'm sure you all live that way too, right? You lived at the copier machine, and people would stop and talk to me, and they'd bring up issues. Well, guess what? They planted that seed in my mind, and that would show up in the newsletter. And so it was great because now the Board of Education was aware of all the wonderful things this department was doing. Before, they're like, what's an ENL department? They knew nothing. They didn't know anything we were doing. And so we shared our celebrations, and we made sure we invited board members to those. We had classes for the educators. We had a parent come in and teach Korean because we had a large Korean population. So they were teaching educators how to speak Korean, and we invited board members to that. We would have events, any special events we have, we always issued invitations to board members so they would come, and their eyes open to what we were doing, and they were so much more aware, but it was done in a positive way, not fight, but planting that seed. And then when time came for asking for funds for this or trying to do something like that, they were much more supportive, as were administrators, because administrators were receiving these too, and now they're aware of what we do. And then my educator colleagues were saying, hey, we didn't know that's how you ran your program. Hey, we didn't know this is what we should do when students have exams. And it just built a great collaborative relationship because people understood. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Susan. That was really helpful to have people get a different perspective, and from both the different location and also a different way that these things have been handled in the past. So if anybody has any final questions, please speak now, forever hold your peace, or type it in the chat or raise your hand. You know what I mean. So I'll give you another minute. And some people are putting really useful suggestions in the chat. I suggest that you all scroll up through it because people have been putting things in there that have been valuable the whole time. And yeah, if there's not anything else, then I would say, I thank all of you for joining us. Again, you will see in the emails you get from New York State TESOL itself on the Mondays when the next one is scheduled. It'll be March 22nd or 23rd. We're confirming that with the second guest who's there. And then the following one will be on April 21st. Again, the second one is more at the district level, local and district level. And then the last one is more towards the state and national level. Different aspects, different avenues of advocacy. Otherwise, I'm going to throw it back to Christine to close it out, and thank everybody for being here.
So thank you, everyone. We also didn't show, but there was one last slide. If you're not a NICE TESOL member already and you want to be, we have a special promo going on right now in February for new members only. If you join NICE TESOL today, it's $15 with code February 15. You can join by going on nicetesol.org. This is we're in our 51st year. We just celebrated our 50th year together. We also have a Facebook page. We have an Instagram and a Twitter. On the Facebook and the Instagram page, I think it's on the Twitter as well. We have Bridget Pitarielli. I always mess her name up. She is our web specialist, and she is constantly a wealth of knowledge, sharing tips, articles, great little things that are going on in other members' classrooms, and she'll share them. She shares articles. Nice TESOL is a really, really great organization to be involved in. I'm so happy that this past year and a half, I've really started to embrace it more and get more involved. And I wish that I had realized how great of an organization it was much sooner in my career. There's just so much to be learned as you go. I feel like, we're all always lifelong learners, and there's always room for new improvement and room to learn something new. So join us. We always have something going on at Nice TESOL. And with that, I think that our session is over. The advocacy team and I thank you very much for taking an hour out of your day to join us. We hope you found this session helpful, and be on the lookout for the links for those sessions that will be coming up in March and April.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Katie, for your hosting of the event. And everyone else, thank you for being here.